If you look back on the day that you were abducted, knowing what you know now about safety, would you have done anything differently?
Yes, I would either have not have left without one of them taking me, or I would have just gone home sooner.
What about when the car approached you? Would you have done anything differently?
There was nothing differently that I could really have done, because by that point it was out of my power. It wasn't a bike ride for sure. It was terrifying. And most people just don't understand that. I've gone through some stuff. I've gone through some stuff that'll send, psychiatrists insane, and just, very intelligent people. A person's mind can only take so much, and every case is terrifying in its own way.
At 4:30 on Friday afternoon, 13-year-old Ben Ownby and 15-year-old Shawn Hornbeck were escorted into the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. Ownby was abducted Monday afternoon near his home in Beaufort, Missouri. Hornbeck disappeared 4.5 years ago near his home in Richwoods, Missouri. Two missing boys found at the same time, allowing for a reunion of indescribable emotion between parents and their children.
In the history of criminal investigations, the first 72 hours after a child goes missing are the absolute critical window. Once that milestone passes, the hope of finding the victim alive almost completely fades. But what happens when a young boy vanishes without a single trace, plunging a family into years of endless despair, only for a second disappearance to shatter a nearby community exactly 4 years later? No one could have predicted that these two puzzle pieces, separated by time and space, would lead to one of the most miraculous rescues in American history. Welcome back. Today, we are diving deep into the case files of Shawn Hornbeck and Ben Ownby. Welcome back. Today, we want to take you to a place where nightmares simply aren't supposed to happen. Imagine a town where the very concept of locking your front door at night feels completely foreign to its residents. This is Richwoods, Missouri. It is a small, former mining town, tucked away in the sprawling, sparsely populated landscapes of the American Midwest. Out here, the winding dirt roads stretch on for miles, cutting through thick, quiet canopies of trees. It is the quintessential tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone else by their first name. If your car breaks down on the side of the road here, 3 neighbors will pull over to help you before you can even reach for your phone. It is a place built on a profound, unspoken trust among its people. We are starting our story here today because, to truly understand the sheer magnitude of the terror that is about to unfold, you first need to understand the absolute perfection of the peace that preceded it. And living right in the heart of this sanctuary was an 11-year-old boy named Shawn Hornbeck. Shawn was exactly the kind of kid you would want living next door. At 11 years old, he was remarkably well-behaved and a genuinely dedicated student. When we look at the fabric of who Shawn was, we see the pure, unfiltered essence of childhood. He wasn't the type of kid to spend his time getting into trouble. Instead, his world revolved around the simple, innocent joys of life. He was incredibly passionate about video games, spending hours trying to beat his high scores, and he loved baseball with his whole heart. But perhaps his greatest sense of freedom came from his bicycle. Shawn loved taking his bike out, pedaling hard against the gravel, and exploring the endless dirt paths that wove through his quiet town. For an 11-year-old in Richwoods, a bicycle wasn't just a toy. It was a passport to adventure, completely unrestricted by the heavy fears and anxieties that often plague larger cities. This wonderful sense of freedom was nurtured by his incredibly loving parents, Craig and Pam Ockers. Craig and Pam were the very definition of a model family. Their home was filled with warmth, clear structure, and an absolute abundance of affection. They built their entire lives around ensuring Shawn felt supported and deeply loved. They gave him the independence a growing boy needs, but always with the watchful, caring eye of parents who cherish their son above all else. You could feel the bond they shared in every single interaction. It was a home where saying, "I love you," wasn't just a passing phrase, but a daily practice. And it was this exact foundation of unwavering trust and love that set the stage for an ordinary Sunday afternoon that would soon fracture their reality forever. The weather that day was crisp and clear. Shawn, eager to make the most of his weekend, asked his parents if he could ride his bike over to a friend's house. It was a perfectly normal request, one he had made 100 times before. There was absolutely no reason to hesitate. Pam and Craig smiled and agreed. Reflecting on that exact moment, his mother, Pam, later shared a memory that would echo in her mind for years. She recalled, "He asked to ride his bike to his friend's house. We agreed and told him, just be home by 5 p.m. I kissed him, told him I loved him, and stood watching him ride his bike until he disappeared down the big road. It was just an ordinary goodbye, a kiss on the cheek, a simple deadline. 5 o'clock. It was the kind of mundane, everyday moment that happens in millions of households, completely devoid of any warning. But as the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in Richwoods began to shift. The warm, golden sunlight that had illuminated the dirt roads began to fade into a heavy, oppressive dusk. The familiar, joyful sounds of children playing in the distance slowly dissolved, replaced by the isolating, rhythmic chirping of evening crickets. The sky turned dark, casting long, unfamiliar shadows across the acre's front yard. Inside the house, the clock on the wall ticked steadily. The hands finally aligned. It was 5 p.m. The driveway remained entirely empty. The road was silent. Shawn did not appear. "5 o'clock came and went. In the Akers household, the initial feeling was not outright terror, but rather a sharp, uncomfortable prickle of anomaly. Shawn was a boy of routine, a child who understood boundaries and respected his curfews. When the hands on the clock slipped past the agreed-upon hour, Pam Akers felt that sudden, cold drop in her stomach, the universal instinct of a mother sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Hoping for a simple explanation, she picked up the phone. She began dialing her way down a mental list of Shawn's closest friends, expecting to hear that he had simply lost track of time playing games. But with every call, the narrative of a harmless delay began to fracture. The responses from the other end of the line were uniform, and they were chilling in their simplicity. No one had seen Shawn that day. He had not knocked on any front doors. He had not been playing in any neighboring yards. The boy was nowhere to be found. The boundary between a late child and a missing child is a terrifying threshold to cross. Realizing that her highly obedient son would never voluntarily vanish into the night, Pam and Craig did not wait for the situation to resolve itself. As the rural darkness fully engulfed the town of Richwoods, they made the definitive call to the authorities. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within moments, the quiet isolation of their property was shattered by the flashing red and blue lights of the Washington County Sheriff's Office and the local fire department. The reality was now inescapable. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a crisis. What happened next spoke volumes about the tight-knit fabric of their small community. Richwoods was not a town that waited for official protocols or daylight to take action. Within an astonishing 30 minutes of the agonizing realization, a localized command center had organically formed. Home-made flyers, hastily printed with the 11-year-old's smiling face, were already passing from hand to hand. Hundreds of neighbors, people who had watched Shawn grow up. People who knew the Akers family grabbed their flashlights and plunged directly into the dense, unforgiving woods surrounding the town. For Craig and Pam, the sudden mobilization was both a comfort and a terrifying physical manifestation of their worst nightmare. Stranded at the epicenter of this sudden chaos, Craig would later recall the haunting visual of that exact moment. He described an agonizing vigil that perfectly captured their sheer helplessness. "We were sitting on the front porch and just looking out into the darkness. Everywhere you looked, you could see the lights of flashlights just shining here and shining there, and hearing people calling Shawn's name. That specific imagery, two parents paralyzed on their porch, surrounded by a sea of erratic, sweeping beams of light and desperate voices echoing into the void, anchored their profound despair. It was the visual representation of a terrifying search for a needle in a haystack. Simultaneously, law enforcement began the critical, meticulous task of reconstructing the boy's final known movements, desperately trying to establish a definitive timeline. Witnesses were quickly located, providing a breadcrumb trail that only deepened the mystery. Shawn had been seen behind the local school earlier that afternoon. By 3:30 p.m., he was observed pedaling his bicycle past the Catholic church, seemingly just a carefree boy enjoying his weekend. The final, crucial sighting occurred exactly an hour later, at roughly 4:30 p.m. A witness spotted Shawn riding his bike near the rural intersection of Highway A and Highway 47, and then absolute silence. That specific intersection marked the exact geographical coordinate where Shawn Hornbeck simply ceased to exist. Beyond that point, the trail grew instantly and inexplicably cold. There was no abandoned bicycle discarded in a ditch, no torn clothing snagged on a branch, and no physical signs of a branch and no physical signs of a struggle on the gravel shoulder. He had vanished as seamlessly as if he had been erased from the very fabric of the earth itself. For the investigators, and for the family waiting on that porch, this precise timeline triggered the most dreaded psychological countdown in criminal history. In the world of missing children, the first 72 hours represent an absolute lethal window. With every tick of the clock, every frantic sweep of a flashlight in the dark, and every unanswered echo of his name, the statistical likelihood of a safe recovery plummeted. The invisible vanishing of Shawn Hornbeck had officially set the clock ticking, plunging his family into a psychological abyss where time was their greatest enemy. Massive influx of federal resources, shifting the visual scale of the narrative. Local authorities are quickly overwhelmed, prompting the immediate arrival of the FBI and their specialized card team. The script moves from the claustrophobic intimacy of a grieving family's front porch to a sprawling, militarized search grid. Search dogs meticulously scour the dense woods, while highly trained dive teams plunge into the dark depths of local caves, sinkholes, and rural bodies of water. The pinnacle of this desperate phase revolves around a nearby lake. Acting on the alerts of multiple tracking dogs, investigators make the colossal, time-consuming decision to completely drain the lake. For 3 agonizing days, industrial pumps roar, draining millions of gallons of water. The audience holds their breath, bracing for a grim discovery. But when the muddy lakebed is finally exposed to the sun, it is entirely empty. This is not just a failed search operation. It serves as a profound narrative metaphor for the case itself, a massive, monumental effort resulting in an absolute, devastating void. To keep the retention graph stable during a prolonged, stalling investigation, the script must inject red herrings, plausible but ultimately false leads that force the viewer's brain to constantly formulate new theories. The first major distraction arrives in the form of a rumored traffic collision. Whispers circulate about 2 young women who struck an unidentified object on a dark road near where Shawn vanished. Investigators impound the suspect vehicle, meticulously collecting hair and tissue samples from a dented bumper. For a brief, tense moment, the audience is led to believe this might simply be a tragic, covered-up accident. However, the FBI forensic results return a crushing anti-climax. The remains belong to a stray dog. This micro-loop of suspense is deliberately engineered to exhaust the viewer, simulating the emotional whiplash felt by the actual detectives. When the accident theory collapses, the script introduces a much more sinister angle to keep the mystery alive. Anonymous tips flood the hotline, suggesting that Shawn's disappearance was not random, but calculated. The rumors allege that the young boy had accidentally stumbled upon clandestine operations and illicit transactions hidden deep within the rural woods. The narrative briefly morphs from a standard missing person case into a dangerous conspiracy involving underground syndicates, silencing a witness. Yet, despite chasing down every shadowy whisper and shaking down local informants, investigators find absolutely zero concrete evidence. It is another brilliantly placed narrative dead end that wastes precious time on the ticking clock. However, the most effective tool for audience manipulation in this phase is the introduction of a primary suspect, a physical avatar for the audience's suspicion and anger. Enter Lou Kent. Kent is a local man whose behavior is deeply unsettling and highly anomalous. He repeatedly injects himself into the investigation, even showing up uninvited at the Akers family home. He tells the grieving parents that he has been having vivid, disturbing dreams of Shawn buried near a local beaver dam. In a Hollywood script, this character archetype is the perfect scapegoat. He acts erratically, his alibis frequently change, and his unwarranted proximity to the victims makes him overwhelmingly suspicious. For the audience, Kent becomes a lightning rod. We desperately want him to be the perpetrator because it gives our free-floating anxiety a definitive target. However, despite intense interrogations and surveillance, the FBI cannot find a single piece of physical evidence to link him to the crime. He is a ghost in the machine. By the end of this phase, the investigative momentum has ground to a complete halt. The lake is empty, the forensic tests lead nowhere, the syndicate conspiracies are baseless, and the prime suspect is legally untouchable. We have successfully trapped the audience in a labyrinth of frustration. They are now emotionally exhausted, deeply invested, and absolutely desperate for a breakthrough, perfectly priming them for the massive midpoint plot twist that is about to rewrite the entire story. In criminal profiling and investigation, time is the ultimate adversary. The first 72 hours of a missing person case are fueled by pure adrenaline. Law enforcement moves fast, the community rallies, but what happens when year one passes? The adrenaline evaporates. The grim reality of a cold case begins to set in. This transition is not a sudden event. It is a slow, quiet fade. The original investigators simply move on. The local sheriff who stood on the Acker's front porch on day one eventually retires. A completely new generation of FBI agents inherits the desk. They review the old files with fresh eyes, but they find no new evidence. Slowly, the thick manila folders containing the details of Shawn Hornbeck's disappearance are relocated. They move from the center of the active workspace to the back of a steel filing cabinet. The search grids are abandoned. The tip lines go silent. The town of Richwoods gradually returns to its normal baseline. But for the family left behind, the baseline is permanently destroyed. While the official investigation stalls, time inside the Acker's home stops completely. The family is trapped in a psychological holding pattern. We can observe this physical manifestation clearly in Shawn's bedroom. The room becomes a pristine time capsule. His parents leave it exactly as it was at 5 p.m. on that fateful Sunday. Not a single video game has shifted. His baseball equipment sits in the exact same spot. Analytically, this is not just a room. It serves as a psychological anchor. To box up his belongings would mean accepting a permanent absence. The human brain, locked in a state of ambiguous loss, simply refuses to do that. His mother, Pam Akers, adopts a very strict daily protocol. Every single morning, she pins a custom-made button to her shirt. The button clearly displays Shawn's smiling face. She absolutely refuses to step outside her front door without it. To an outside observer, this might just look like a mother's standard grieving process. But from a behavioral standpoint, it is a highly calculated survival tactic. It is a deliberate fight against public amnesia. Pam understood a very dark truth about human nature. Society forgets. The public attention span is short. She later explained her exact mindset during this prolonged period of silence. She stated, "My biggest fear is that people out there will go on with their lives and never give him another thought. You have to find ways to keep your child's name and face out there. You can't let anyone forget. Maintaining that level of vigilance is mentally exhausting. It becomes especially brutal when the stalled case offers a sudden false spark of hope. Nearly 2 full years into the vanishing, a strange anomaly occurs. The stagnant waters of the investigation are briefly disturbed. Park rangers patrolling a public area in Eureka, Missouri, find something unsettling. It is a cryptic message scrawled on the back of a door in a public park restroom. The graffiti explicitly mentions abducted children. Given the geographic proximity, the FBI is immediately notified. Crime scene photographers document the vandalism. The message is then painted over to avoid public panic. For a brief, tense moment, the investigative machine wakes up again. Is this the breakthrough? Is this the perpetrator taunting the authorities? The answer is no. After exhaustive background checks and behavioral analysis, the lead dissolves into nothing. It is classified as random vandalism. The trail goes completely dark once again. In the anatomy of a cold case, a false lead is often far more damaging than no lead at all. It forces the victim's family to relive the initial shock, only to drop them back into the exact same void. The calendar pages simply keep turning. 1 year becomes 2. 2 years become 4. The Ackers family learns to function within this frozen state. They adapt to the silence of the unknown. They do not know it yet, but the silence has an expiration date. 4 years later, the exact same pattern is preparing to repeat itself. Another boy is about to step off a school bus, and the collision of these two timelines will change everything. In the structural anatomy of a high-retention true crime documentary, the narrative midpoint is historically the most dangerous zone for audience drop-off. The initial adrenaline of the first disappearance has inevitably waned. The investigation has hit a wall, and the storyline is effectively trapped in the stagnation of a cold case. To prevent the retention graph from flatlining, master storytellers must deploy a critical mechanism known as the midpoint restart. This technique involves taking an audience that has grown accustomed to the tragic silence of the past and violently pulling the psychological rug out from under them. The narrative executes this shift by abruptly fast-forwarding the timeline to January 2007, more than 4 agonizing years after Shawn Hornbeck vanished into thin air. The geographical focus pivots slightly to Franklin County, Missouri, a neighboring jurisdiction located just a short distance from the original Ground Zero. By introducing a new time frame and a parallel location, the script signals a hard, terrifying reset to the viewer's expectations. Enter the new focal point, 13-year-old Ben Ownby. From a behavioral profiling perspective, establishing a victim's baseline is essential to highlighting anomalies. Ben was a creature of strict, unwavering habit. His daily post-school routine was practically written in stone. He would step off the school bus, walk directly inside his house, drop his belongings, and immediately immerse himself in video games. In storytelling, when a rigidly established, comforting routine is suddenly shattered, it functions as a blaring psychological siren for the audience. That afternoon, Ben's father, Don Ownby, returned home from work expecting to hear the familiar digital chimes of his son's games. Instead, he was met with a heavy, suffocating silence. The television was dark, and the controllers were untouched. Don frantically tore through the house and the surrounding yard before dialing his wife Doris in a state of escalating panic. Analytically, this sequence is a masterclass in structural parallelism. The audience is forced to watch in real time as the exact excruciating nightmare that dismantled the Oakers family 4 years prior meticulously replays itself. This deliberate echoing weaponizes the viewer's prior emotional investment, layering a profound sense of inescapable déjà vu over the unfolding crisis. To spike the tension to its absolute zenith, the narrative steps back and utilizes raw, primary source audio. In true crime editing, nothing pierces a viewer's psychological defenses. Quite like a genuine emergency recording, the script cuts to the actual 911 call. Dispatcher, what is the problem? Don Ownby, his voice visibly trembling with restrained terror. My son is missing. He's 13. The bus driver saw him get off the bus at 3:45, but he hasn't come home. Hearing the unvarnished dread in a father's trembling voice acts as an emotional defibrillator. It eradicates any logical distance between the screen and the viewer, transforming an analytical case study into a visceral, present-tense emergency that demands complete attention. However, the most critical shift in this phase occurs within the response of the authorities, when the local dispatch relays the details of a young boy vanishing near a rural road in the late afternoon. A collective, invisible chill sweeps through the ranks of law enforcement. They instantly recognize the pattern. The haunting, unresolved memory of Shawn Hornbeck surges back to the surface. Driven by the institutional trauma of that lingering cold case, the police response is fundamentally different this time. There is absolutely zero hesitation. The FBI is instantly mobilized. Tactical roadblocks are rapidly established across county lines, and a massive, coordinated search grid is activated. The investigators, much like the captivated audience, understand the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of the 72-hour rule. They know that once that window closes, survival probabilities plummet. The lethal countdown clock has been violently reset, and the authorities are operating on maximum overdrive to prevent history from claiming a second victim by intertwining the fresh, urgent crisis of Ben Ownby with the ghostly echoes of Shawn Hornbeck. The narrative seamlessly fuses 2 timelines together, guaranteeing an absolute audience lock-in as the story hurtles toward its climax. The frantic search for Ben Ownby was yielding nothing but escalating panic until investigators began meticulously canvassing the rural neighborhood surrounding the bus stop. They were desperately searching for anyone who might have seen anything out of the ordinary during that critical afternoon window. This routine, door-to-door canvassing, led them to a 15-year-old boy named Mitchell Holtz. Mitchell was a neighborhood friend of Ben's, just a typical teenager who happened to be walking near the area right around the time Ben had vanished. When questioned by the local police, Mitchell delivered a statement that immediately shifted the heavy atmosphere inside the command center. He described a highly suspicious vehicle lingering exactly where it did not belong. "I saw a white Nissan pickup truck parked sideways across the road," Mitchell recounted to the officers, "and then it took off flying down the hill at a high rate of speed." In high-stakes investigations, especially those flooded with intense media attention, eyewitness testimony is heavily scrutinized. Teenagers, in particular, are often viewed by law enforcement with a degree of professional skepticism. Detectives know that the overwhelming pressure of a missing child case can cause a witness's memory to blur. Worse, the frenzy of a high-profile investigation can sometimes prompt individuals to fabricate stories simply to insert themselves into the narrative. Investigators harbored a significant fear that Mitchell might be exaggerating or imagining the threat. To ensure they were not chasing a phantom vehicle while the 72-hour countdown clock relentlessly ticked away, the authorities made a hard, calculated decision. They asked the 15-year-old to submit to a polygraph test. The psychological pressure on this teenager was immense. If he failed, the task force was back to square one, staring into a terrifying void. But Mitchell did not waver. He took the polygraph examination and passed it without a single sign of deception. With his credibility firmly established, detectives sat down to press Mitchell for more specifics about the white truck. What followed was a moment that left seasoned federal agents utterly astounded. They expected the vague recollections typical of a passing witness, a blurry color, a partial shape, or perhaps a fragmented license plate number. Instead, they were handed a masterclass in vehicular identification. An investigator later recalled the sheer disbelief in the interrogation room. He started rattling off incredibly detailed information: a rust spot over the fender, an elongated glass window on the camper shell, and a 2-inch trailer hitch on the back. The reason for this photographic, hyper-specific memory was as simple as it was miraculous. Mitchell Holtz was not just an observant kid. He was an absolute, unapologetic truck fanatic. While a normal pedestrian would merely register a white blur speeding away in the distance, Mitchell's brain automatically and instinctively cataloged the make, the model, the aftermarket modifications, and the unique rust patterns. The predator had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had parked his vehicle in front of the one teenager in the entire county who could identify it down to its smallest mechanical flaws. Armed with this highly specific profile, the forensic teams rushed back to the rural bus stop. They were no longer searching the dirt blindly. They knew exactly what to look for. Scanning the gravel and mud where Mitchell had seen the truck parked sideways, they found the undeniable physical proof backing up the teenager's extraordinary story. Embedded deeply in the earth was the distinct indentation of a 2-inch trailer hitch. Even more crucially, crime scene technicians successfully poured and cast the tire tracks left behind in the dirt. When they analyzed the dried plaster casts, they discovered a critical identifying anomaly. The truck was running on 2 entirely different types of tires. The narrative of the investigation had officially shifted. This was no longer a desperate blind search in the dark. The authorities now possessed a physical footprint and a highly detailed, undeniable vehicle profile. The perpetrator, who firmly believed he had executed a flawless and invisible crime, was now tethered to a distinct white Nissan pickup. The net was being cast, and the trap was finally set. Armed with Mitchell Holtz's meticulously detailed description, authorities launched a massive statewide manhunt. However, chasing a white pickup truck in the American Midwest is the ultimate logistical nightmare. It is arguably the most common vehicle on the road. The tip lines completely imploded. Over 800 phone calls flooded the command center within hours of the public broadcast. Local police and state highway patrols began pulling over virtually every white truck in sight, from Chevys to Fords to Mitsubishis. The sheer volume of data was paralyzing. In storytelling, we use this overwhelming scale to emphasize the agonizing weight of the ticking clock. The narrative pace accelerates here, shifting into a tense, breathless hunt. Every single minute spent clearing an innocent driver was a minute the actual predator had to cover his tracks. But in high-profile criminal investigations, the most significant breakthroughs rarely come from a meticulously planned dragnet. They almost always stem from a bizarre twist of fate, a moment where routine police work accidentally collides with a monster. Exactly 3 days after Ben Ownby was snatched from his rural street, a couple of police officers were on a completely unrelated assignment in Kirkwood, Missouri. They were simply serving a routine arrest warrant at a quiet, unassuming apartment complex. It was standard, everyday police work. But as the officers navigated the complex's parking lot, something in their peripheral vision forced them to hit the brakes. Sitting right there in the open was an older model, white Nissan pickup truck. The officers slowly approached the vehicle, mentally cross-referencing the 15-year-old witness' extraordinary description. The details aligned with terrifying precision. There was the specific rust spot over the fender. There was the elongated glass window on the camper shell. And attached to the rear bumper was the undeniable 2-inch trailer hitch. It was the needle in the haystack, sitting in plain sight, miles away from the abduction zone. Just as the officers were processing the magnitude of their discovery, the owner of the vehicle casually walked out into the parking lot. His name was Michael Devlin. From a profiling standpoint, Devlin was entirely unremarkable, a large, unassuming man who managed a local pizza parlor. He did not look like the boogeyman the entire state was hunting. When the officers intercepted him, Devlin's initial demeanor was incredibly relaxed. He was polite, comfortable, and conversational. When asked if he was familiar with the recent disappearance of Ben Ownby, Devlin calmly nodded, acknowledging that he had seen the frantic news coverage on television. He played the role of the cooperative, unbothered citizen flawlessly. However, seasoned investigators know exactly how to test a suspect's psychological baseline. They casually pushed the boundary, asking Devlin if they could take a quick look inside his apartment just to definitively rule him out. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. The relaxed cooperative facade evaporated. Devlin's demeanor hardened, his body language becoming rigid. He looked directly at the officers and delivered a chilling defensive challenge. If you have enough reason to go into my apartment, you get a search warrant. In the legal realm, refusing a search is a constitutional right. But in behavioral analysis, a sudden, hostile shift in a subject's baseline is a massive glowing red flag. Devlin thought he was shutting the door on the investigation, utilizing his rights to protect his fortress. He fundamentally failed to realize that his sudden defiance had the exact opposite effect. By arrogantly demanding a warrant, he inadvertently confirmed their deepest suspicions. The authorities now knew they were not just talking to a man with a matching truck. They were talking to a man desperately guarding a dark secret behind the door of his apartment. The invisible net was instantly cast, and the endgame was officially in motion. The theater of a criminal interrogation does not always begin inside a windowless room. Often, the most crucial tactical victories occur in plain sight. For the FBI, kicking down Michael Devlin's apartment door without a warrant was a legal impossibility and a massive strategic error. They needed his vehicle, and they needed him isolated, but they had to acquire both voluntarily. The extraction was executed with clinical precision. The following day, federal agents walked into the local pizza parlor where Devlin worked as a manager. They did not arrive with blaring sirens or drawn handcuffs. They arrived with a carefully constructed behavioral trap. Approaching him amidst the chaotic midday lunch rush, they politely requested his cooperation. They explained that his white Nissan unfortunately matched a suspect vehicle profile in the ongoing Ben Ownby investigation. "Help us eliminate you as a suspect," the agents offered. Believing he had scrubbed his tracks perfectly, Devlin's ego dictated his response. Confident in his own superiority, he agreed, handing over his keys so the truck could be towed to the St. Louis field office. He thought he was proving his innocence. In reality, he had just surrendered the very puzzle piece that would lock his cage. Once the heavy metal door of the FBI interrogation room clicked shut, the true psychological warfare commenced. This is the domain of behavioral analysis. Initially, Devlin presented as a masterclass in deceptive composure. He fielded questions regarding his schedule, his whereabouts, and his daily routines with practiced, frictionless ease. His heart rate appeared steady. His syntax remained unbroken. However, skilled investigators are trained to listen not just to what a suspect says, but to what they offer completely unprompted. Trying to control the narrative, Devlin repeatedly injected a specific detail into the conversation. He kept talking about a teenage godson who resided with him in his apartment. He leaned on this narrative crutch heavily, using the boy's existence as a preemptive shield to explain away any potential anomalies should the police ever secure a search warrant for his home. The agents sitting across the table did not interrupt. They recognized the overcompensation immediately. They simply let him talk, allowing the suspect to meticulously weave a web of lies, while they held the single thread that could unravel it all. The pivot from rapport building to direct confrontation is the most delicate moment in an interrogation. After hours of allowing Devlin to build his false sense of supremacy, the lead agent decided the trap was primed. The tone in the room dropped to a chilling, absolute, serious register. The agents played their ace in the hole. They calmly informed Devlin that forensic teams had successfully lifted plaster casts of the tire tracks left in the dirt near the rural bus stop where Ben Ownby vanished. Then, they delivered the fatal blow. Those unique, mismatched tire impressions were a flawless, indisputable match to the white Nissan pickup currently sitting in the FBI impound lot. The shift in Devlin's physiology was catastrophic. The practiced calm shattered instantly. The agents watched as his throat worked in a hard, visible swallow. The color drained from his face, and the rigid control he held over his body language evaporated into pure, unfiltered panic, faced with undeniable physical proof that placed him at the exact scene of a federal kidnapping. Devlin's cognitive functioning began to misfire. He was cornered. His brain scrambled desperately to find a concession, a way to regain even a sliver of leverage in a room that was rapidly closing in on him. His psychological defenses, built over years of absolute secrecy, suffered a total systemic collapse. In a frantic attempt to redirect the agent's focus away from the tire tracks, he reached for his established alibi, his godson. But under the crushing weight of the moment, the lie fractured. Looking frantically at the federal agents across the steel table, Devlin blurted out a sentence that was meant to be a deflection, but instead became one of the most paradigm-altering confessions in modern investigative history. "That's not my godson," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "It's Shawn Hornbeck." Inside that interrogation room, time simply stopped. The air was vacuumed from the space. The federal agents sat frozen in absolute stunned silence. They had brought this man in to question him about a boy missing for 72 hours. Not once, in the entire 2-hour interrogation, had anyone breathed a single syllable about a child who had vanished into thin air more than 4 years prior. In one panicked, uncalculated slip of the tongue, the suspect had accidentally bridged an impossible gap, bringing Missouri's darkest cold case violently back to life. Can you imagine the absolute, paralyzing shock that erupted the second those words left Michael Devlin's mouth? It's Shawn Hornbeck. For 4.5 agonizing years, Shawn had been a ghost. He was the boy on the fading posters, the tragedy that haunted an entire state. And now, this suspect was claiming the ghost was sitting in an apartment, just a few miles away. The FBI agents didn't even take a breath to process the impossibility of it. They scrambled. The mission instantly and violently shifted from a tense interrogation to an active, high-stakes hostage rescue. I want to put you in the passenger seat of that lead FBI cruiser. Imagine the adrenaline flooding your system. The drive from the interrogation site to the Kirkwood apartment complex is objectively short, maybe a 5-minute trip on a good day. But for the heavily armed agents gripping their steering wheels, white-knuckled and hearts pounding against their ribs, those 5 minutes stretched into an absolute eternity. They were racing against a ghost story that had suddenly, inexplicably come back to life. Every red light felt like a lifetime. Every turn felt excruciatingly slow. They knew the monster was in custody, but they had no idea what condition the boys were in, or what horrors might be waiting behind that door. When the tactical teams finally pull up to the complex, there is zero hesitation. They swarm the building and breach the door to Unit D. As that door swings open, the daylight cuts through the stale, filthy, suffocating air of the apartment. And right there, sitting tensely on the arm of a worn-out couch, is 13-year-old Ben Ownby. You can practically see the adrenaline surging through his young veins. The moment the heavily armed agents step inside, Ben looks like a coiled spring, ready to sprint straight for the exit. His 4-day nightmare is over, but as the agents secure Ben, their eyes adjust to the dim light, scanning deeper into the room. Tucked away in the shadows, standing quietly, is an older teenager. He is taller, his face hardened by lost years, but to the veteran investigators who had memorized the missing posters, there is an undeniable, haunting familiarity. One of the lead agents slowly approaches him, lowering his weapon. The chaotic noise of the raid seems to completely drop away. The room goes dead silent. The agent looks the young man directly in the eyes and asks a question he never actually thought he would get to ask. "What is your name?" The teenager looks back. He doesn't flinch. His voice is incredibly calm as he answers, "Shawn, and what is your last name?" The agent presses, his own heart likely hammering against his tactical vest. "Hornbeck," the boy replies. I want you to really feel the profound weight of that exact second. This seasoned federal agent, a man who has spent his career staring into the darkest, most depraved corners of humanity, a man accustomed to pulling bodies from the woods, has to choke back his own overwhelming emotion. He looks at this boy, a boy who by all statistical metrics was supposed to be dead, and says the most beautiful words in the English language. "Son, we are here to take you home." But the true emotional climax, the absolute catharsis of this 4.5-year nightmare, doesn't happen inside that filthy apartment. It happens a few hours later, back at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. Craig and Pam Aukers received the phone call they had spent over 1,600 days praying for. They rushed to the station, their minds undoubtedly spinning with a chaotic mixture of desperate, fragile hope and terrifying doubt. Is it really him? He was a tiny 11-year-old boy when he vanished. He is a 15-year-old young man now. What if it is a cruel mistake? The authorities lead Pam and Craig into a darkened observation room. On the other side of a two-way glass mirror sits the teenager recovered from Unit D. Pam steps up to the glass, her breath catching in her throat, her hands trembling against the pane. She studies the young man's face. He has grown so much. He looks so different. But then the boy shifts in his chair. He looks up, and a faint, hesitant expression crosses his face. It is a very specific, slightly crooked smile. In that fraction of a second, the universe realigns. Pam's knees give out. She collapses into tears of absolute, earth-shattering relief. There is no DNA test needed. There is no shadow of a doubt left in her mind. As a mother, she instantly recognizes the soul behind that crooked smile. It is her baby boy. He is alive. 4.5 years of unimaginable hell, of staring out into the dark abyss of the Missouri woods, of pinning a memorial button to her chest every single morning. It was officially, definitively over. Against all statistical odds, against every established rule of criminal investigation, Shawn Hornbeck had survived the dark, and he was finally going home. When the initial explosive shock of the rescue finally faded, a very specific, deeply uncomfortable question began to circulate through the media and the court of public opinion. It is the elephant in the room whenever we analyze this case. People looked at the facts. Shawn Hornbeck was occasionally allowed to ride a bicycle outside. He made a few friends in the apartment complex. He had access to the outside world. So why didn't he just run away? Why didn't he scream for help? To answer that, we have to completely dismantle how the average person thinks about captivity. As true crime analysts, we know that the strongest, most inescapable prisons do not require iron bars or heavy padlocks. They are constructed entirely within the mind. You have to put yourself in the shoes of an 11-year-old boy. On the very first day of his abduction, Shawn was faced with a massive, terrifying predator who was fully prepared to end his life to silence a witness. In a moment of sheer, unprecedented brilliance, this young boy did something extraordinary. He negotiated for his own survival. He made a desperate psychological pact. He agreed to comply, to take the captor's last name, and to follow every single twisted rule, just to keep his heart beating. Over the next 4.5 years, Michael Devlin did not just hold Shawn physically. He systematically dismantled the boy's psychological foundation through relentless psychological control, chronic manipulation, and the constant, looming threat of extreme violence against Shawn and his family back home. Devlin installed an invisible perimeter. For a child trapped in that terrifying environment, cooperation is never consent. It is the human brain's most sophisticated, primal survival mechanism. Shawn didn't stay because he wanted to. He stayed because his traumatized mind genuinely believed that running away would result in his immediate death. It is the absolute peak of survival mode. When the public ignorantly began to question Shawn's actions, his parents stepped into the spotlight with fierce, righteous indignation. Pam and Craig Akers fiercely condemned the cold, callous judgments of outsiders. They made it absolutely clear to the world, no one has the right to sit in the comfort and safety of their living room and judge the survival tactics of an 11-year-old boy who spent years navigating a living nightmare. And that, right there, is exactly why we analyze these cases on this channel. We look beyond the sensational headlines to understand the deep psychological realities of human survival without ever blaming the victims who endured the unimaginable. If you appreciate this level of deep, empathetic psychological analysis, and if you want to support a community dedicated to uncovering the truth behind these harrowing stories with respect, please take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button. It truly helps us keep these important analytical conversations going. Now, let's talk about the final reckoning for the monster who orchestrated this horror. For Michael Devlin, the justice system showed absolutely zero mercy. The fury of the community and the unwavering, incredible strength of the surviving boys culminated in a courtroom sequence that Devlin could not manipulate his way out of. The judge handed down a staggering, monumental sentence: 72 consecutive life terms. Let the weight of that number sink in. 72 lifetimes. Devlin was completely stripped of his autonomy, condemned to spend the rest of his natural life locked inside a concrete cell, permanently removed from society. He will never breathe free air again, and he will never, ever have the opportunity to hunt another child. Hearing that gavel come down was a massive, collective exhale of relief for the entire country. The story of Shawn Hornbeck and Ben Ownby is undeniably terrifying. It exposes the darkest, most predatory corners of human nature lurking just out of sight. But ultimately, this is not a story about a predator's triumph. It is a profound, epic testament to the human spirit. It is about a young boy's incredible, calculated resilience to survive the unsurvivable, and a family's unyielding, ferocious love. As we close this case file today, I want you to remember this: darkness can imprison a person, but it can never ever erase their place in the hearts of those who never stop searching. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next case.